Well, it's been a little while since the last tier list, which honestly, it doesn't feel like it's been that long. Time has just been passed by way too fast, I guess. But either way, here we are. I've been lacking on making Persona 5 videos in comparison to all the other games here on the channel, and I've especially been lacking on making videos about the story itself, ironically. So today, I'm going to be ranking every single palace in the game from worst to best. To be clear, I don't plan on making this a complete breakdown going over everything in each palace's arc. I'll save that for a retrospective, but I do want to give my general thoughts on how I feel about them overall, how they contribute to the story, how well it's written, the pacing, all the things you'd expect out of a tier list like this basically. There's a lot to go over here, but before we begin, I would like to let y'all know that the second wave of Persona 5 Royal Figgies have now been released. If you're interested in getting some affordable collectibles for Ryuji, Makoto, or Yusuke, I definitely recommend checking the description, and if you use code GOJITA at checkout, you'll get a little discount. With that out of the way, let's get started. Starting off with what I believe to be the worst palace in the game is Kanashiro's Bank of Gluttony. I bet a lot of you were expecting me to say the Okumura Palace, but no, this is the only palace in the entire game I'd go as far to say it's just bad. It's just strictly bad. The main problem isn't that it's not important or whatever as some might argue, it's just boring as fuck. Coming from the previous two palaces, which were Kamoshida and Madarame, those two palaces were much more personal and just better written. You had a really deep reason morally to stand against them for the things they were doing since they affected people around you directly. On being blackmailed and Yusuke having his work stolen. But here, this is the first palace where you don't have much reason to hate him besides him being a greedy mob boss, which I find to be extremely boring, especially in the context of Persona. I guess you could argue it's sort of personal since the students of Shujin are being affected by it, but Persona can do a lot better than having faceless NPCs be the crux of an issue. Like, obviously the students are affected and that sucks, but really, who cares in the context of a game? You're playing games like this to be invested deeply into the narrative and characters, and this palace fails in all these aspects. You could find someone like Kanashiro in damn near any other crime-related game. It is the most boring fucking villain you could possibly make. Oh, I want money because I have nothing else. Like, wow man, real original. And yes, it's based off a real life person. All the palace owners are based off real life people for the most part. But every time I get to this palace, I just want it to be over. It's just not fun. The build up to the palace beginning is pretty solid though, with Makoto going out of her way to track down the Phantom Thieves, the group and her going on a trail for clues, Makoto getting herself captured, and then you all being blackmailed into getting Kanashiro money. It makes sense, and it shows Makoto's abrasiveness at the start of her character arc well, and she has a badass awakening scene. But beyond that, there's not really anything else I care about. There's no moral dilemma, no deep internal struggle with the group or anyone in it. There's just nothing. You target a mob boss because he's bad, and that's it. It is important in the sense that this was the first target the Phantom Thieves went after to up the stakes from the previous one for public perception, and Makoto joins the team, but that's all there is, man. Like, there's just nothing of substance in this damn palace. Even if we're talking gameplay and design of the palace, which is an important aspect of these dungeons, Kanashiro is still not good. The majority of this palace is a standard old bank layout with the only cool gimmick being the master lock system right before you secure the treasure. It's fucking lame. Let me know how y'all feel about it though, because I don't know how popular or unpopular this dungeon is. I don't like it, and that's just how it is. So Kanashiro sucks, but like I said, he's the only one I think is a bad palace owner in this game. Even this next one coming up, I don't hate despite him being low on the list, and that is Okumura's Spaceport of Greed. Unlike the previous palace, there is a lot to talk about here. In fact, I might have the most to say about this dungeon out of any of them. I think this palace has some of the highest highs and the lowest lows of any palace in Persona 5. The main thing people don't like about this dungeon story-wise is the argument between Morgana and Ryuji, and I'm right there with y'all if you feel that way. Even on my first playthrough, I was scratching my head at the whole situation because regardless of how you feel about who's right or wrong, who cares? It doesn't matter at this point. But it's the things Morgana does that are just like, man, what the actual hell are you doing? Taking Haru, a brand new Persona user who has basically never fought before, and she doesn't work out in real life either, so I'm not trying to say she's weak, but she's definitely inexperienced, into a palace by yourselves when you have no idea what to expect. If you want to risk your own life, go for it, but don't put someone else's safety in jeopardy for your own pride and ego. And it's so insane how when you try to mention these kinds of things, people will be like, well, that's the point of Persona. The people aren't supposed to be perfect. Which is like, yeah, no shit. I think I've picked up on that in the thousands of hours I've invested into this series. But at a certain point, you can't defend every single aspect of writing with this excuse. It's just lazy. I was not a fan of Morgana at all past this point. I'm not even gonna lie. And it's not because Morgana is this objectively poorly written character. I just thought he was really fucking annoying past that point. So that argument and the whole build up to the Okumura Palace basically is pretty bad. But something else I noticed with this palace in terms of pacing is that I don't know if I'm just tripping or what, but it feels like this palace in particular takes absolutely forever to get started. Most of the palaces have a lot of scripted events and preambles since they obviously have to set the story up and whatnot. But this one in particular, it felt like I was never in control. Even with the Kaneshiro arc, it felt like I was playing the game by investigating, but for the beginning of this palace, it feels like you're doing nothing. This is more of a matter of taste, I guess, since it's not like that's objectively bad or whatever. It is a JRPG after all, but that's how I feel. The biggest problem of all with this palace though, and this is something I'm sure you all saw coming, is that this is supposed to be Haru's big moment in the story, her going against her fiance and dad to forge her own path. But since so much of this arc revolves around the drama of Morgana leaving the team, it feels like her character arc got swept under the rug. Since Haru is already a late stage party member, one of the latest ones you get, it's almost like she barely exists in the story sometimes. Now, I wouldn't go as far to say that Morgana or Ryuji ruined Haru's character as some people would argue. The fault of how she's handled lies in the fact that the writers at the end of the day poorly involved her into the narrative, and that is the fault of the arc as a whole. They could have easily done the argument in Morgana's side story while also giving Haru more spotlight, especially considering the entire fucking arc happens because of Haru. That's where my biggest issue with this arc lies. I still love her and she's one of my favorite characters in Persona, as I mentioned in the previous Persona analysis series, but I mean, come on, every other party member's arc was handled better in previous and later arcs. At least she got some redemption in Strikers, I guess. This arc isn't all bad though. It does play a very important role in the narrative overall, one that for some reason seems to get overlooked really hard. Up to this point, the Phantom Thieves were beginning to choose their targets based on the public perception and demand rather than choosing them for their own reasons. People wanted Okumura to be the next target on the fan site and forums, which led them to investigating him and eventually deciding to target him to save Haru from her fiance. Obviously, the ultimate decision to do it for Haru was a good thing. It would be really fucked up to just let her get sold off just because. But let's remember y'all, the reason they got there in the first place was because of their decisions to target more influential people. If they ignored the fan site and social media and put more thought and time into the next targets, they might have never ended up doing it in the first place. This led to them falling into the Japanese government's trap, which set the rest of the game up from then on after Okumura was killed on TV. Without this arc, a lot of things would not have happened in this game, so it is very important overall. This is what I meant by having lots of ups and downs. The beginning is pretty shit, but the climax of the arc is one of the best of any palace in the game. This averages out to being a fairly average arc story-wise. Not bad, but not great. Then there's of course the palace itself, which is very divisive in the community apparently. Most people I've seen have leaned towards saying this is the worst palace in the game to play through, which I kind of agree with, but I also don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be. It's meant to be purposely monotonous and annoying to illustrate the working conditions of Okumura foods. But even with that in mind, I still found myself having more fun in this palace than the Kaneshiro palace. The main things I think get blown way out of proportion are the maze gimmick and the Shadow Okumura fight. If you just pay attention to what the hell the switches do in that maze, it's seriously not that bad. You can figure it out, and even if it takes a little bit of time, it's not like it's hard, it just takes time. So really, I don't mind that section of the palace at all. The Shadow Okumura fight, I'm not gonna lie, I mean no offense by this, but it's just a skill issue if you can't beat it. All it is a knowledge check and skill check to see if you've been paying attention to the robot's weaknesses, what personas you have on Joker, and how you take advantage of Baton Pass. I totally understand with struggling with it at first. I'm not too proud to admit that I did struggle on it, but it's one of the very few fights in the game that tries to challenge you in any way, and for that I appreciate it, to be honest. The game is already easy enough, so having at least one skill check in the entire main story is a great thing to see in my opinion, and it makes you feel great once you finally beat it. Honestly, I kind of enjoyed this palace overall, even story-wise. I know I hated on the beginning a lot, but once you get past it, there's nothing I hate about this palace. The gameplay is alright, story's alright, and that's all I can really ask for out of a palace in this game. So even though it's low on the list, I still like it. Coming right after the Okumura Palace is Shido's Cruiser of Pride. I think this one is actually the most divisive one in the game, more so than even Okumura for several reasons. For one, it's a very long dungeon. Probably, well, no, I think it just is the longest one in the game. If you're planning on beating this dungeon in one sitting or one day in-game, you gotta be prepared to sit down for several hours and chip away at it. That's not particularly a bad thing though. I mean, a dungeon being long isn't really grounds for it just being straight up bad. But a lot of people have varied opinions on the story at this point in the game. Some argue this is where the pacing gets real bad, the story falls off, so on and so forth. But story-wise, this palace doesn't seem much worse than the others to me. This is the main target that's been foreshadowed throughout the course of the entire game. From the start, you know you're probably going to end up going against them, even if the characters themselves don't know until way later. Which I guess is something people don't like that much in retrospect. Maybe it was too predictable. I don't know though, because the stuff that happens right after this arc flips everything upside down, so I'm not sure if you can really say it was that predictable. I don't know. Either way, I don't mind it too much. It is definitely a step down from the previous palace that happens, which is size, but there is a lot of good stuff that happens here. You get to see the struggle within the group to deal with the slander they hear or go through on a regular basis. You also get to see just how deep Shido's corruption goes, with his palace showing that he values himself and his supporters more than the entire country. It's a pretty wild moment when you infiltrate the palace for the first time and see just how bad it is yourself. You also see the trust your confidants have in you to protect your identity, and everyone in the Phantom Thieves gets their moment to shine in the palace itself. I think that's my favorite part of the Shido Palace, the moments where everyone plays their part to get an invitation letter to secure the treasure. Seeing everyone come out of their comfort zone to contribute to the final goal really makes you feel like you're in it together with the Phantom Thieves. It also shows how dedicated everyone is to taking Shido down, how far the group have come as people, and their desire to clear their name and prove Joker's innocence. And of course, you get to have your final confrontation with Akechi as well. Confrontation being in quotations for reasons that may or may not be obvious, which is important as you'd imagine. To clarify, if we were talking about vanilla Persona 5, this whole confrontation part of the palace would actually take this palace down a notch. Akechi's character in the original game is just bad, but in Royal, it's so much better, so this scene became better in retrospect. They try to make Akechi this twisted, tragic character, but to me his strategies just made no sense in the base game, and they still kind of don't in Royal, but the third semester stuff and his new confidant helped to flesh him out. He hated his father Shido and wanted revenge, so his plan to do this was to help him and expose his crimes to the public in a big scandal once he got bigger. This makes sense on paper, but I don't really know how he thought that was going to work out, because I don't see any real way it would pan out the way he wanted it to. But hey, maybe I'm misremembering or I'm just not thinking about it. I don't know, let me know if I'm missing something. The ending of the palace is great, with Shido going as far to kill himself temporarily to try and stop the Phantom Thieves. Then you got Ryuji's badass sacrifice, and then, well, let's not talk about what happens after that, because we all know what happens after that, don't we? It all sets up the next part of the story super well. So even though I don't have a ton I want to say about the story of this palace, I still enjoy my time with it when I play through it, even though Shido himself isn't that interesting. Gameplay wise, I think this dungeon is a little bit hit or miss, but I think it's alright overall. I'm not the biggest fan of the mouse gimmick, but traversing through the halls trying to find the right ways to go was a nice change of pace from the other palaces. It felt unique even if the layout itself isn't the most intricate. The only major problem I have with the palace is that those hallway sections, while being kind of fun, drag on for so long. I don't mind how long the palace is in general, but those fucking hallways never ended, dude. It felt like I was in the back rooms. Shit. When you're not in those dreadful halls though, the palace is very unique and I love the aesthetic of it. Being on a big ass cruise ship, going undercover, seeing all the different areas like the casino and restaurant, it's a very nice palace to play and look at in my opinion. I really don't have much to say about this palace overall though, like I said. It's a good dungeon, I just don't have strong feelings with it. Let me know how y'all feel about it though, because this is a really important palace, so I'd love to hear differing opinions on it. A palace I do have a good bit to talk about though is Madarame's Museum of Vanity. So let's segue into that, shall we? From this point onward, these palaces I think are really good. So Madarame is an artist that plagiarizes the works of his students for his own monetary gain. And considering the rise in things like AI art and generative AI in general in the past year or so, this palace has only become more relevant with time. I'm not here to lecture you on how to use AI or whether you should use it, but the fact of the matter is that generative AI has to learn from some source to train its models, and those sources just so happen to be real, human-made arts. Generative AI is inherently parasitical and steals from the works of real, talented artists. So with this palace focusing on this aspect of human art and the value of it, I can't help but love everything this palace is conveying purely in concept, and I think the way they approached it was spot on. It all starts with Yusuke approaching the group asking On to model. Then as you start to interact with him more at places like the art exhibit, you can tell more is going on beneath the surface. You don't know exactly what, but you can make some assumptions based on the context. They do it in a way that makes Madarame less blatantly evil like the other palace owners, however. Even the group themselves doubt whether Madarame is evil at the start. That is until they infiltrate his palace and see what he's been doing behind closed doors. It isn't just the fact that Madarame is this evil plagiarist that makes this palace interesting though. It's the relationship between Yusuke and Madarame. Seeing Yusuke in denial over the situation because of his trust and upbringing is something I see all the time even in real life. Not in the same context, but similar situations nonetheless. In fact, Yusuke more than any other character's arc carries this palace pretty hard. Most characters in modern Persona games have the key points of their character arc happen during their awakening and then during their confidant. But with Yusuke, it feels like even if his confidant didn't exist, he would still be one of, if not the most fleshed out character of the Phantom Thieves. His struggle to accept the truth that his art is being stolen, defending Madarame, then eventually going against him not out of hate, but out of love for his passion of art. Yusuke isn't the kind of person to go after someone for blind revenge. Even after the arc is over, Yusuke clearly can't bring himself to hate Madarame, and it's something I find to be very interesting and respectable since there aren't many characters like this. It feels so genuine and real from start to finish, which makes the ultimate payoff of defeating Madarame and obtaining the Sayuri painting all the more impactful. This is also one of the palaces I find to have the best pacing out of any of them. In fact, in terms of pacing, I think this outright is the best palace in the entire game. It never feels like it's overstaying its welcome, and if anything, you want it to keep going because every subsequent scene keeps getting better and better. Meeting Yusuke, going to the exhibit, ongoing undercover in the shack, Joker and Ryuji infiltrating the palace, Yusuke's awakening, the palace consistently keeps getting better and better, and you experience all of this at your own pace. This isn't something you can say for many palaces in this game. And maybe this is just me, but I really like the vibe and tone of the early palaces more than the later ones. As I mentioned a bit ago, these palaces felt so personal, and since you're not going after big hotshot celebrities, CEOs, or politicians here, it just made for a very nice experience overall. To top it all off, the palace is very unique in design, keeps things fresh the entire way through, has banger music. I mean, there's nothing bad I have to say about this palace. I might even end up moving this palace up the list by the end of the video because now that I'm recording this and it's coming back to me, this palace is fucking peak. Great story, great gameplay, great pacing, it's phenomenal. Godlike palace overall. Another godlike palace overall is Sai Nijima's Casino of Jealousy. First of all, let's address the elephant in the room. Sai is really hot. I'm sorry, somebody had to say it. Now that we've got that out of the way, this for a long time was my favorite palace in the game. I mean, it's a fucking casino with chips flying everywhere. You can't get much more aesthetic than that. And then you got the fucking music. Let's not even get started on that. But this palace offers more than flavor. It offers one of the most insane parts of the entire narrative. This is one of 3 palace owners to not be owned by someone who is strictly evil. And not only that, it's owned by one of your party member's siblings and the person you've been interrogated by for the entire game. When I tell y'all my jaw dropped seeing that Sai was the next target, I was like, oh shit, it was her palace we started in all along. But things kept getting more and more ludicrous. The Phantom Thieves get caught by Akechi, he joins the team, you get captured in the palace, and then you seemingly get shot in the head, but oh wait, no you didn't. It was all a part of the plan. And I think this moment of the story put me through more of an emotional roller coaster than any other game I've played in my entire life. There are definitely some plot holes with this whole part of the story, but I can't lie, I really enjoy the drama with it. Beyond that, the storyline with Sai herself is interesting and touches on a problem with the workplace culture of Japan, with women getting the short end of the stick, which led to her cognition becoming distorted. She was willing to do anything to make it in her career, even if it meant going as far to convict people wrongfully, which goes against her own set morals and motives. It makes sense that someone as driven as Sai, especially after the loss of her father, would be driven down this path, so it makes you want to root for her and save her from this distorted reality that much more. It also gives Makoto more time in the spotlight, because let's be real, that kind of Shiro arc was nowhere near adequate enough to flesh her out properly. This arc allows the Nijima sisters to become some of the most fleshed out characters in the game. From start to finish, this arc is enjoyable with not many weak points in the story, and it's a great way to segue from the Okumura arc. This arc is when the Phantom Thieves really started to lock in and take their positions more seriously, since things had never been more dire before this. Gameplay wise, I mean, do I really need to say much here? The music is incredible, you have all the party members, mostly, unique gimmicks for traversal, good fights. Really, this palace is some of the most freedom you're given in any dungeon. For most other palaces, I can point out something I don't care for too much gameplay wise, but this one I don't really have many complaints with. Overall, I don't have many major complaints overall. I just like this dungeon a lot, and if someone said it was their favorite palace, I wouldn't argue. The fourth palace of this list is one I'm sure a lot of you out there can personally relate to in some way. Futaba's Pyramid of Wrath. Just like Sai's palace, this is another one where their owner isn't a bad person. In fact, Futaba out of any palace owner in this game has done the least wrong, and she doesn't want to go against you at all really. She just wants you to help her change, which in the context of this game and the Persona franchise as a whole, I think this palace probably best represents the series overall when it comes to Persona 5. Of course, it isn't my favorite palace or else it would be number one, but that doesn't stop me from absolutely loving nearly everything about this arc of the story. Futaba being a shut-in NEET hacker, dealing with the PTSD of losing her mom and the things that resulted from it is the sort of predicament a lot of people find themselves in the modern age of social media and the internet. Most people might not become infamous hackers, but plenty of people cope with their real-life issues by locking themselves in their rooms to avoid interacting with the outside world. Now consider the context of this game coming out overseas in 2020 when that thing was happening, and you can see why so many people relate to this arc. In a time where everyone was locked up in their rooms, either willingly or unwillingly, looking for some way to pass the time in a time of uncertainty, this dungeon almost assuredly hit people where it hurts if they happen to play this game when it released. So purely on concept, I like this palace a lot, just like I did for Madarame, but in practice, I think the way they depicted the sort of apathy and anger that comes from being in a position like Futaba was done beautifully. The palace being a pyramid tomb distanced far away from civilization, her memories being fragmented puzzles, and then the dichotomy you see between her shadow self and real self, I don't think they could have done it much better. It accurately depicts the desire for change, but the struggle to do so alone. Futaba bounces back and forth on everything several times between reaching out to the Phantom Thieves, canceling the plans, meeting them, not wanting to meet them. It's almost like seeing someone relapse or regress over and over again. That on top of seeing Sojiro struggle, someone you've grown to respect throughout the events of the game, to be there for Futaba, it's an emotional dungeon, and the payoff of it is so satisfying when you see her finally break out of her shell. All of these reasons are the main reasons I put this palace over Sai's. It is so damn good, I love it even as someone who is not the biggest Futaba fan. When it comes to the palace itself, however, traversing it isn't my favorite, I won't lie. It's not a bad dungeon, but it is a bit boring to me at times because it feels like you're doing the same thing over and over again, which is partly the reason it's not even higher on the list. It's a rare case of me really liking the story, but not caring for the dungeon itself much, but it still averages out to being one of the better palaces in the entire game despite that. I feel like I'm saying all these palaces are one of the best palaces in the game, but hey, I love this game a lot, so chill on me if that's the case, because these next three palaces are about to see a lot of praise from me as well. We're down to the top three, and starting off the top three is Kamoshida's Castle of Lust. Basically, all the praise I've given to the previous palaces apply to this one, but for me, the early dungeons of Persona games always hold a special place in my heart. I vividly remember the hospital from Persona 1, Seven Sisters High School from Persona 2, Yukiko's Castle in Persona 4, and Kamoshida's Palace in Persona 5. I mean, it's where everything kicks off, and most likely where you're gonna fall in love with the game. And dare I say, I think Persona 5 has the best first arc of any Persona game in the series. I love everything about this palace. The first visit to the metaverse, the bromance with Ryuji, meeting An and Morgana, seeing everyone's awakenings, and all the story moments are absolutely phenomenal. The only thing I don't like about this palace is that a good quarter of it or so are scripted tutorials, which I get why, it's the tutorial of the game, but it makes replays very tedious and annoying. The story and build up during these gameplay tutorial moments, however, make up for it. Kamoshida is someone you really want to see go down, and as I've been saying several times throughout this video, the more personal connection the thieves have to the palace owner, the better. In fact, if you look at this list so far, you can see a direct connection between that aspect and my rankings. Basically, every single palace owner has gotten more personal as we've gone through this list, and considering the fact Kamoshida is the one who started this entire journey, you can't get much more personal than that. It starts with him seeming like a fairly normal coach, then you discover he's been abusing his team, and then he threatens to have you expelled from the school for going against him. Once the Shiho stuff happens though, you're like, all right, we gotta kill him. He's gotta go. He's gotta go. It's like King Von, dudes. Some people gotta go for shit to get better. That's just how it is. At least that's how I was. And it makes you want to see things through to the end. Persona 5 might have a slow start, with it taking a good 7 to 10 hours or something to get into the thick of things, no KSI, but once this dungeon got rolling, I was hooked. I know a lot of my friends who had a similar experience to me, which goes to show how well crafted this dungeon was from start to finish. The payoff of this palace is of course that you take Kamoshida down, but since the stakes are relatively low, being mostly local in your school, the big payoff to me is the formal creation of the Phantom Thieves of Hearts. This is when you know you're in for even more wild things to come, and wild things to come indeed. I don't know, I think it's a 10 out of 10 dungeon, and the best part is that since it's an early game dungeon, the difficulty is actually pretty solid. Persona 5 Royal is a very easy game, and I'm not trying to say the Kamoshida Palace is super difficult, but I think it's the only dungeon that can and will cause some problems for even fairly experienced players. Since you have such limited options in skills, items, personas, all that, you have to manage your resources very carefully if you want to get things done in a timely manner. Not to contradict myself on what I said for Sai's Palace, because I gave that palace praise for being super open, but these limitations made the palace one of the most fun ones to play, in my opinion. It's fun to be broken, but making use of all the limited resources at your disposal is sometimes an even more fun gameplay loop. That on top of the dungeon having a healthy number of bosses, varied layouts and designs, in fact aesthetically this is one of my favorites, I just don't have anything bad to say about it, I love it. Besides the tutorial stuff, but again I get why it's there. This palace is just perfection, not much more to say. Now my second favorite palace I feel like is unironically one of, if not the most underrated dungeons or arcs in the entire Persona franchise. Memento's Depths, or the Prison of Regression. This is a palace that I love not for the personal connection to the owner obviously, but rather everything it represents. If you want to count the entirety of the Mementos aspect of this game into the Memento's Depths palace, then yeah, it would go a little lower because Mementos is quite tedious to go through, but in terms of separating them by arcs, I like to think of Memento's Depths as being its own thing. It's not particularly a palace where there's a ton to say, but the whole aspect of humanity giving up and choosing to be told what to do instead of what is good for them is something that is unfortunately still becoming more prevalent even in our real lives. I mean seriously, how many people do you see using something like ChatGPT to make even the most simple of decisions or actions for them? A lot of people simply do not have the desire to take their life into their own hands, so in this world they forfeited their desires and chose a life of sloth. This is something that I have fallen into and I still fall into even to this day. To be real with y'all, a lot of times I sacrifice things that I know I should do or would benefit me just because it's difficult. It's not something that I particularly like to admit or am proud of, but it's why this palace means so much to me. When I go through this palace, hear the theme playing, and see everything that's happened as a direct result of everything you've been doing throughout the game, it seriously hits hard. I'm a quote-unquote rare person who has played Persona 5 Vanilla significantly more times than I have Persona 5 Royal. So for me, I to a large extent see this as being the true end of the game, which definitely plays a role in my reverence for it. Even then though, when I was playing through this dungeon once again during the whole pandemic, I was just like, man, this game has only become more relevant with time and I don't know how to feel about that. People act like Persona 5's narrative is this childish, unrealistic thing with villains or what have you that you wouldn't see in the real world. But I think that criticism could not be further from the truth. Like, yeah, you're not gonna have a damn alternate reality where you can steal people's treasure, but the way this palace in particular represents the collective unconscious of people just giving up, visualizes the state of the world from the artistic minds behind the game's narrative. If you look at it from that lens of an artistic direction, this palace is basically the writer saying, stop looking for comfort and take your life into your own hands, which is something I did after playing this game. Now let's ignore this whole personal aspect of it with me in particular, and let's focus on the narrative itself for a second. This palace is right after you take down Shido, and it's very clear something is off. Absolutely nothing is going according to plan, and it's likely that Joker is going to be arrested again if they don't do something. So they go to Mementos to figure out what the hell is going on. They do this only to be confronted by the harsh reality of everything they've indirectly done and the state of the world. It's not that they were bad people or did inherently bad things, but things weren't happening the way they thought they were. To some degree, they were going against their own goals, but then when they finally get to the depths, they're completely obliterated by the holy grail that is powering this prison. The shit that happens after that is when shit got really real though. When everyone started getting Thanos snapped out of existence, I really thought I got a bad ending. I was thinking, what the hell did I do wrong? But then the damn plot twist of the Igor happens and it's like, holy shit. That's why he sounded so damn weird and why the twins were acting weird in The Confidant. That moment really showed how big of a threat everyone was up against, because not only were they going against a god like basically every other Persona game, but they were also going to have to go against the wishes of all fucking humanity. Then all the stuff that happens at the end with everyone cheering the thieves on, like Goku charging up the spirit bomb to beat Kid Buu, Joker summoning Satanayo to shoot God in the head to save Christmas. It's just peak, dude, and I wish I could go more in detail with it. Maybe I'll do a video on that someday if y'all are interested, so let me know down in the comments if y'all would want to see that. This palace isn't anything special. In fact, it's intentionally one of the most bland ones in the game to reflect the mood, but that in itself is quite charming in a way if you ask me. Like I said, I love just about everything about this dungeon, I really do. I think it's a great conclusion to the storyline, and it wraps everything back around since Mementos was always this mysterious thing you knew almost nothing about. And it's one of the few times in Persona I've actually been quite uneasy and scared by something that's happened in the story. It's truly distinct and it deserves so much more recognition than it receives. So there's only one palace left, and I'm sure you all saw this coming. This is probably the least hot take of the entire video. Maruki's Laboratory of Sorrow. Straight up, if I went over everything I loved about this palace in this part of the story, this video would probably be twice, maybe even 3 times as long. I don't know. In fact, this is another palace more so than even Mementos Depths that I want to make a dedicated video for. So once again, let me know if you guys would want to see that. I don't know what more I can say about this palace that hasn't been said in this small summary though. Between Maruki's complicated motives and morals, the Phantom Thief's growth and regression, the ideal reality, Akechi coming back to life, the true identity of Sumire, learning about Maruki's past, the palace itself being the most beautiful palace in the entire game, the boss fight, the cinematics, the everything about this dungeon is absolutely peak. And to this day, I think this is not only the best dungeon in Persona 5 Royal, but the best dungeon in Persona history. Genuinely, there's nothing, I can't even speak. There's not one bad thing I have to say about this palace. I guess you could argue that this palace makes the game overly long, but when the content is so fucking good, I could give a shit less how long it is because I didn't want it to end. It's that good. There's not a ton of moments where I cry even in Persona games, but that final showdown with Maruki where you fight him hand to hand while he vents his frustrations to you because he trusts you is one of the most beautiful moments I have ever seen in fiction. I was an actual mess, bro. Like I was, not even gonna lie, I was crying pretty bad. I can't even lie. And I'm not afraid to admit that because people should not be afraid to be vulnerable with their feelings. Just thinking about it gets me emotional, bro. It's just like, oh my God, I got my voice cracking and everything, bro. There's so many things I want to talk about with this palace, but I know if I get started, I'm not going to be able to stop. I can't put into words in a summary how much this palace means to me. Like, I just can't. In fact, I feel like I'd be doing this arc of the game a disservice by not going in detail. So basically, to give a very quick summary, this is one of the best written parts of a game I have ever seen in my entire life. If Persona 6 carries the same kind of writing throughout that whole game, then Persona 6 will be the greatest game ever made to me. Maybe even finally topping Metal Gear Solid 2 for me, which has been my favorite game for the entirety of my life. That is how good it is. And that's even with the fact that I did indeed play more of the base game than Royal and how much Memento's deaths meant to me. I'm going to go in circles if I keep doing this, but it's an 11 out of 10 Palace. One of the best things I've ever seen in my life. Nuff said. Once again, a bit of a longer video today, but I'm glad I was finally able to find some time to talk about the story aspect of Persona 5 Royal instead of gameplay related things or what have you, as I've been doing across the past couple of years. This is a truly special game, and I hope you found my thoughts on the palaces in general to be a fun, engaging experience. I'd love to hear your own thoughts on the palaces down below in the comments, so please feel free to drop your opinions on either my tier list or the game itself. I try to read all the comments I get, so go wild, homies. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider dropping a like and a sub. It helps the channel out a lot, and I'll give you a free cookie as always. Here you go, homie. It's been your boy Yandere Gogeta, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out, everybody, and have a great day.